Welcome, dear listener, to the Sleeping Hourglass. The final days of Socrates, Athens' wisest voice. He never wrote a single word, yet his questions still float across time, a whisper against the stone walls of memory. His death was not a collapse, but a rising, a serene stand for a life devoted to truth, integrity, and the gentle art of inquiry. If you enjoy these moments, you may choose to subscribe or offer a like, not out of obligation, but as a quiet gesture of keeping this corner of stillness alive. Athens lies beneath a restless sky. The air feels heavy, as though the very stones of the city bear the memory of defeat. Once the jewel of the Aegean, radiant with temples and theatres, the city now limps in the shadow of a war it could not win. The Peloponnesian conflict has ended, but peace has not descended like a bomb. Instead, it hangs like smoke after a fire, acrid and unwelcomed. The people walk the agora with lowered gazes, their voices hushed. Once, this square had been the very heartbeat of democracy. Here, citizens gathered to debate, merchants cried out their wares, playwrights provoked laughter and tears. But now, suspicion coils through the crowd. Words, once weapons of freedom, feel dangerous in the open air. Athens is wounded, not only in its body but in its soul. Pride has been shattered, its empire broken, its navy humbled. The democracy that once seemed invincible now trembles, fragile as an ancient vase with too many cracks. Those in power clutch tighter to control, fearing dissent as if every question might reopen the city's wounds. And in this silence, amid the guarded looks and muttered accusations, an old man still wanders barefoot through the streets. Socrates. He walks as he always has, unaffected by the shifting tides of politics and war. His steps are slow but steady, his face carved with the lines of age, yet his eyes burn with that same unyielding curiosity. To the potter shaping his clay, to the soldier boasting of courage, to the young noble draped in wealth, he poses questions that unsettle, questions that peel back certainty like bark from a tree. "Tell me," he asks, voice calm, "what is courage? Is it merely standing in battle, or is it knowing when to stand and when to yield?" His questions fall like pebbles into deep waters, rippling outward. Some respond with laughter, brushing him aside as a harmless eccentric. Others bristle, angered at being exposed, as though his words shine an unwanted light on their hidden ignorance. Yet a few linger, unable to escape the quiet gravity of his presence. For in a time when Athens is frightened of voices, Socrates alone refuses to silence his own. The city watches him with unease. To some, he is a gadfly, a nuisance that will not leave the horse of Athens in peace. To others, he is a kind of prophet. Though he disclaims any wisdom of his own, he insists he knows nothing, that his gift is only in questioning. And yet, in this wounded Athens, even questioning feels dangerous. For this is not the radiant Athens of Pericles, where words soared like the columns of the Parthenon. This is Athens after ruin, Athens that remembers tyranny, Athens that trembles before the threat of instability. Its people clutch at certainty as though it were a raft in storm-tossed seas. Here comes Socrates tugging at the ropes, asking whether the raft itself is sound. The shadows of Athens are not only in its broken walls, but in its spirit. Citizens whisper of betrayal and treason. Neighbors distrust one another. Old wounds of factional strife between democrats and oligarchs still bleed quietly beneath the surface. In such a climate, questioning becomes dangerous. A word spoken too boldly may be mistaken for sedition. An idea voiced at the wrong time may carry the weight of treachery, yet Socrates persists. He wanders from the workshops to the gymnasia, from the marketplace to the port, searching not for riches nor glory, but for truth, or at least the echo of it. His voice is steady, his gait unhurried. To him, philosophy is not a refuge from the world, but the very heartbeat of living. Still, his presence stirs unease. To the proud, he seems mocking. To the devout, he seems impious, for he questions the gods with the same fearless persistence he gives to politicians. To fathers, he is dangerous, for the youth gather around him, drawn not by dogma, but by the thrill of thinking freely. And so, in the uneasy hush of Athens, suspicion turns slowly toward him. Like a figure walking against the wind, he becomes visible in contrast, standing firm where others bow to fear. Evening descends upon the city. Torches flare and shadows dance across the marble steps. In the dim light, the city seems more vulnerable, its grandeur cloaked, its scars revealed. One can almost hear the stones whisper of all they have seen. Victories and defeats, festivals and funerals, hope and despair. And now, they watch this old philosopher moving quietly through the darkness, asking questions no one wishes to answer aloud. For Athens, in its wounded pride, begins to fear its own reflection. To be questioned is to be reminded of failure, to be exposed to weakness. The city that once thrived on debate now longs for silence. And yet Socrates will not grant it. He is relentless, not out of cruelty, but out of a devotion deeper than loyalty to city or law, a devotion to truth itself. The tension grows quietly, like a gathering storm. For the city that once crowned itself queen of reason cannot forever tolerate the man who insists reason must be pursued, even when it cuts against pride, power, and tradition. The shadows lengthen, unease deepens. Athens is restless, and within that restlessness, the fate of its most persistent voice begins to form. But on this night, the story is still unfolding. Socrates is simply a man in the marketplace, barefoot, questioning, calm as ever. The city watches him with wary eyes, but he does not waver. In the silence after war, amid the wounds of empire, one man continues to speak, not loudly, but with the quiet force of conviction. Athens may try to bury its unease in silence, but Socrates reminds it with every question that the soul cannot be silenced so easily. The shadows of Athens are deep, but within them flickers a light, the fragile, stubborn glow of inquiry that refuses to die. And so the city walks uneasy, its silence heavy, its gaze turning more often toward the barefoot questioner in its midst. For even in wounded Athens, a life of questions continues. Socrates is not a man of possessions. His cloak is plain, his feet bare, his face unshaven. He carries no scrolls, no staff of office, no wealth that might mark him as a teacher or statesman. To meet him in the streets of Athens is to encounter, at first glance, nothing remarkable. Yet to speak with him, even for a few moments, is to be drawn into a current that changes the direction of thought itself. He calls himself ignorant. This is the paradox that defines him. When others boast of knowledge, he shakes his head and admits he knows nothing. And yet, in admitting ignorance, he touches upon something deeper than those who proclaim certainty. For wisdom, in his eyes, is not the possession of truth, but the endless turning toward it. In the bustling marketplace, amid the cries of merchants selling olives, figs, and pottery, Socrates moves quietly, listening more than he speaks. A soldier boasts of courage. Socrates asks what courage is. A wealthy man praises justice. Socrates wonders aloud whether justice serves the rich or the good. A priest invokes the gods. Socrates, gently, asks what piety means and whether it is pleasing to the gods because it is good or good because it pleases the gods. His questions disarm. They strip away the borrowed garments of reputation and reveal the bare self beneath. Many find this unsettling. Some laugh it off, retreating into jokes and excuses. Others grow angry, resenting the way his inquiries corner them, as though they have been caught naked in the public square. But a few, often the young, are enchanted. They see not humiliation but illumination, and they linger by his side, eager for more of this strange conversation that makes the familiar world feel new. Plato, years later, will write these conversations into dialogues, shaping them into philosophical dramas. But here in the moment, there is nothing theatrical about them. It is simply a man asking questions, persistent and unrelenting, refusing to accept easy answers. His philosophy does not belong in libraries or schools. It belongs in the air, in the agora, in the sweat of the gymnasium and the dust of the workshops. It belongs where life itself unfolds. This is why he is so dangerous. Not because he preaches rebellion. He does not. Not because he claims divine revelation. He insists he has none. But because he exposes how fragile our certainty truly is. In a city anxious for stability, his questions are like tremors beneath the ground. They remind Athenians that the foundations on which they stand, their politics, their traditions, their gods, may not be as solid as they believe. He does not spare the powerful. When generals return from war, he asks if victory proves virtue or whether it is only chance. When politicians rise to speak in the assembly, he challenges whether persuasion makes truth or if truth exists apart from the applause of the crowd. In the presence of craftsmen, he praises their skill but wonders aloud whether wisdom in one craft gives knowledge in all. He is relentless but never cruel. His irony is gentle, his voice calm, his manner almost indifferent, and yet, beneath that stillness, there is a fire that will not go out. For Socrates, philosophy is not a profession, but a way of living. To question is to breathe. To examine is to walk rightly through the world. The unexamined life, he tells those who will one day record his words, is not worth living. This is not a slogan, but a creed lived daily, in sandals worn thin, in endless hours spent among people who would rather not be confronted with their own ignorance. What prepares a man for death better than this? Already, he lives as if possessions, status, and comfort mean nothing. Already, he has stripped himself of illusions, including the illusion of certainty. When the time comes to stand before judges and face the sentence that awaits him, he will not tremble, for he has rehearsed the art of letting go with every question he has asked. The city begins to notice his influence on the youth. Young men follow him, not because he promises them riches or power, but because he gives them something more intoxicating. The freedom to think beyond what their fathers taught them. They laugh as he unmasks the pretensions of self-proclaimed experts. They linger, hungry for the joy of discovery, even when that discovery reveals how little they truly know. To their elders, this feels dangerous. If young men learn to question their teachers, their priests, their rulers, what stability remains? And so Socrates becomes more than a figure of curiosity. He becomes a figure of suspicion. His life of questions, once dismissed as eccentric, now appears threatening. The very method that makes him harmless. The refusal to claim answers, the constant turning toward inquiry, makes him powerful in ways the city cannot control. But he does not waver. Day after day, he returns to the agora, his questions like drops of water wearing down stone. He never grows weary of the dialogue, never abandons his calling. To him, this is not merely conversation, it is the work of the soul. It is the practice of dying before death, of loosening the grip of pride and ignorance so that truth, however fleeting, might be glimpsed. In this way, his life becomes a preparation. Each question is a step away from illusion. Each dialogue is a reminder that the soul must not betray itself for comfort or for fear. Socrates is not training soldiers or crafting laws. He is shaping, quietly, the courage of the human spirit. And when the time comes for that spirit to be tested, when accusations rise, when a jury gathers, when the city turns its suspicion into law, he will meet it as he has met every other moment, with questions, with calm, with the stubborn serenity of a man who knows that living rightly matters more than living long. And so the barefoot philosopher walks on, leaving behind ripples of unease and wonder in every soul he meets. His questions prepare him for what Athens is preparing for him in return. The voices of the accusers, soon to rise in the crowded air of judgment. Every age that trembles with fear seeks someone to blame. Athens, wounded and restless after war, does not look only to its scars, but to the voices that disturb its uneasy silence. In the agora, people whisper that philosophy itself has grown dangerous. Men remember how other thinkers once fell under suspicion, how Anaxagoras, who dared to call the sun a fiery stone, barely escaped death, how Protagoras' writings on the gods were cast into the flames. They recall these things not as distant memories, but as warnings freshly carved into the city's conscience. And so, when the name of Socrates rises in the murmurs of accusation, it is not a surprise. To some, it feels inevitable, as though the city, exhausted by his endless questions, has finally chosen to answer him not with dialogue, but with charges. The accusations gather slowly, like clouds over the sea. They do not come in the form of one man's grievance, but as a chorus of voices speaking with both resentment and calculation. Their words carry the weight of fear dressed as righteousness. The charges are written simply, yet behind their simplicity lies a storm. That Socrates does not believe in the gods of the city, that he introduces strange new divinities, that he corrupts the youth of Athens. These accusations fall like stones, heavy and deliberate. They are not concerned with truth alone, but with perception, with the delicate balance of power, with the anxiety of a city longing for certainty. At the forefront stands Meletus, a young poet, little known except for this sudden rise into the role of accuser. His face is earnest, his words sharp. He insists that Socrates is a corrupter, a man who plants weeds in the minds of the youth. In truth, his ambition may drive him more than his conviction. The trial offers him a chance to be remembered, his name fastened forever to the fate of Athens' gadfly. Beside him is Anytus, a man of politics, seasoned and practical. He represents not only himself, but the wider resentment of craftsmen, statesmen, and fathers who look upon Socrates with suspicion. To them, the philosopher is not harmless, but subversive, undermining respect for tradition, mocking the foundations of the city's piety and civic order. Anytus carries the weight of those who fear that young men trained to question may grow unwilling to serve. His accusation is not merely personal, it is political, rooted in the preservation of the democracy Athens has fought to restore. And then there is Lycon, an orator skilled in speech, driven perhaps by rivalry. His voice lends eloquence to the chorus, sharpening the edges of accusation with the power of words. If Socrates unsettles through questioning, Lycon strikes through rhetoric, appealing to the jury's passions, wrapping fear in polished phrases. Together, they form a triad: poet, politician, orator, youthful ambition, civic preservation, and rhetorical force. It is not by chance that they come together. Their union reflects not simply individual grievances, but the broader unrest of Athens itself. The charge of impiety cuts deep. To accuse a man of dishonoring the gods is to accuse him of severing the very threads of civic life. The gods are not only objects of worship, but guardians of the city's fate, interwoven with its festivals, its oaths, its victories, and its sorrows. To suggest that Socrates denies them is to suggest he endangers the city's bond with the divine and the corruption of the youth. This is the charge that ignites anger in the hearts of fathers. For many have seen their sons gather around Socrates, returning home with questions that unsettle the household, challenging the wisdom of their elders, doubting the tales of tradition. In times of stability, such questioning might be tolerated, even admired. But in times of fragility, when Athens fears the cracks in its foundation, these questions are seen not as sparks of learning, but as flames of disorder. The accusations echo old patterns. In moments of insecurity, societies often turn on their thinkers, fearing that new voices will unravel the fabric of what remains. Socrates, who never claims wisdom, who only questions, becomes a symbol of danger precisely because he is unwilling to yield to fear. And so, beneath the formal charges lies something deeper. The struggle between the freedom of inquiry and the hunger for stability. Athens, once radiant in its embrace of debate, now grows wary of the man who will not stop asking whether its values are true. The trial, then, is more than the judgment of a man. It is the judgment of an idea. Whether a city born of democracy and sharpened by philosophy can endure the sharp edge of its own questioning. The accusers speak not only for themselves, but for a city that longs to feel safe again. Their words rise in the assembly and in the marketplace, murmurs spreading like fire through dry grass. Some nod in agreement, muttering that Socrates is dangerous, that his clever words poison young minds. Others, more sympathetic, sigh in sorrow, sensing that the city is turning against its own conscience. And Socrates himself, he does not rush to defend, nor does he lash out in anger. He continues to walk the streets, continues to ask questions, as though the shadow of accusation does not alter his steps. To him, the charges are but another conversation, another opportunity to inquire into truth, yet those who watch know the weight of what is coming. Athens has chosen its stage. The theatre is not of marble columns and painted backdrops, but of law courts crowded with citizens, their votes determining life or death. Here, rhetoric will clash with philosophy. Here, the accusers' voices will swell against the solitary calm of a man who insists on truth above survival. The story unfolds like a slow tide. What begins as whispers becomes formal indictment. What lingers as suspicion solidifies into law. And in this way, the voices of Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon become more than men. They become instruments of history, carrying Athens toward a moment it cannot reverse. The charges stand, written and proclaimed. They are simple words, yet they carry the power to end a life. They are the city's attempt to silence the questions it cannot bear to hear. The accusers have spoken. Athens has spoken through them. The stage is set, and as the voices of accusation echo through the city, the crowd turns its gaze toward the courts, where soon hundreds will gather to listen. The trial awaits, and in that crowded chamber, Socrates will rise, calm, barefoot, and unflinching, as the trial begins. The day arrives. Athens gathers not for a festival, not for a play, not for the clamour of the assembly, but for a trial, yet in this city, where theatre and politics have always walked side by side, the trial itself feels like a performance, a stage upon which the city's conscience will be tested. The law court is vast, open to the sky, a place where hundreds of jurors sit shoulder to shoulder. They are citizens drawn by lot, not trained judges, each carrying the power to decide the fate of a man whose name is known across Athens. Their faces are stern, expectant, some curious, some already hardened with suspicion. The murmur of their voices rises like the buzzing of bees, restless, uneasy. Socrates enters, as he always does, without pomp. Barefoot, cloaked simply, unadorned. No carefully rehearsed gestures, no hired orators to plead his cause. He stands as he has stood countless times in the agora, the same man who questions bakers and generals, priests and artisans. His calm presence seems out of place here, as though he has wandered into the court by accident. Yet it is precisely this calm that unsettles. For where others tremble at the thought of trial, Socrates stands unflinching, as if the matter at hand were no different from any other conversation. The accusers have already spoken. Their words ring in the jurors' ears: impiety, corruption, danger. They appeal to the city's fears, to its longing for stability after war. They paint Socrates as a man who undermines the gods, who seduces the young into disobedience, who threatens the fragile order that holds Athens together. Their speeches are polished, their tones measured, crafted to stir suspicion. Now it is Socrates' turn. He clears his throat, not to summon eloquence, but to speak plainly. His voice is not rich or theatrical, it carries no ornaments of flattery. It is the voice of a man accustomed to the marketplace, to conversations under the sun, a voice that trusts truth more than style. Men of Athens, he begins, I do not know how you were affected by my accusers. Their words were persuasive, though hardly true. I am nearly carried away myself, so convincingly did they speak. Yet, you will hear from me nothing of the kind. Already he has broken with convention. In Athens, trials are theatres of persuasion, places where orators strive to move the jury with passion, with tears, with appeals to patriotism. But Socrates refuses. He will not twist words to flatter, nor will he beg for pity. He will not parade his children before the jury to stir their hearts. He stands, instead, as he is, plain, unembellished, offering not persuasion, but truth. This is the heart of his defiance. He calls the jurors not to judge by emotion, but to measure by reason. I will speak, he says, in the manner I am accustomed to speak in the marketplace, where many of you have heard me, not carefully arranged like a speechwriter's words, but as the truth rises in me. The jurors shift uneasily. Some frown, disapproving of his refusal to follow custom. Others lean forward curious. They have heard his questions in the streets, but now he brings those same questions here into the solemnity of law, as if the court itself were no different from the agora. He turns to the charge of corrupting the youth. If I corrupt them, he asks, Do I do so intentionally or unintentionally? For if unintentionally, then the law does not call for punishment, but for instruction. And if intentionally, then tell me, what man would deliberately harm those among whom he must live? Does not harm return to the one who causes it? Who would wish such a fate? The simplicity of his reasoning strikes like a blade through fog. He is not defending with rhetoric, but with logic, drawing his accusers into the very net of questioning they so despise. On the matter of impiety, he speaks carefully, but without fear. They say I introduce new divinities, yet do I not speak of a daemonion, a voice that restrains me from certain actions? If I believe in such a divine sign, must I not believe in divinity? Who believes in music without believing in musicians? Who believes in offspring without believing in parents? The jury murmurs. Some are persuaded, others confused, still others angered by his refusal to yield. For Socrates does not flatter the gods of the city in the way priests and politicians do. He speaks of divinity not as superstition, but as something higher, something that calls the soul to integrity. To some ears, this is wisdom. To others, it is arrogance, a danger to tradition. Throughout his defense, Socrates remains calm. He does not weep. He does not tremble. His serenity unsettles the court, as if he has already accepted the outcome, whatever it may be. It is this calm, more than his words, that divides the jury, for some see in it the unshakable peace of a man who stands in truth. Others see only defiance, an old man mocking their authority. The trial becomes more than a matter of guilt or innocence. It becomes a mirror held up to Athens itself. Will the city honor its tradition of free speech, its legacy of philosophy, its pride in inquiry, or will it silence the very questioning that once made it great? The courtroom under the Athenian sky becomes a theatre of the soul. The jurors sit not only as judges of Socrates, but as judges of themselves. His words, stripped of ornament, carry a weight deeper than rhetoric. They ask, what matters more, life preserved through compromise, or truth spoken at any cost? The air grows heavy with tension. The accusers press their case with passion. Socrates answers with calm. Neither side yields. The jurors, hundreds of citizens holding their pebbles of judgment, feel the burden of history pressing upon their hands. For in this moment, Athens is not merely deciding the fate of one man. It is deciding whether it can bear the sharp light of philosophy or whether it will choose instead the comfort of silence. And Socrates, barefoot, unflinching, stands as though the verdict is already written in the stars. And so the trial begins, not as a contest of eloquence, but as a contest of the soul. The jurors sit in silence, their pebbles waiting, as Socrates prepares to speak not an apology, but a declaration, no apology. The air within the courtroom trembles like the stillness before a storm. Hundreds of men, gathered in judgment, lean forward in expectation. They have seen defendants rise with trembling knees, voices breaking as they speak of their innocence, or of their children's tears, or of the disgrace that exile would bring. They know the usual rhythms of a plea, appeals to pity, reminders of military service, invocations of gods and ancestors. But when Socrates stands, the silence thickens. He is barefoot, as always, his cloak simple, his frame unremarkable. What sets him apart is not appearance, but presence. His calm radiates like a stone dropped into water, rippling outward through the restless crowd. He begins, not with apology in the sense the jury expects, but with a confession of sorts. a confession that he has no polished words, no rehearsed speeches. He will not adorn his defense with rhetoric, for to do so would betray the very life he has lived. He says he will speak, as he always has, plainly, truthfully, without fear. And already, in that refusal to play the expected role, Athens feels the sting of his difference. To stand before judgment and decline the ornaments of persuasion is a kind of defiance. But Socrates is not here to flatter, nor to escape at any cost. He is here to remain himself. For him, the trial is not only about whether he will live or die, but about whether he can remain faithful to the truth that has guided him through every marketplace conversation, every question posed beneath the Athenian sun. He cannot live dishonestly, and so his words carry the weight of integrity rather than performance. He reminds the jury of the divine sign, the daemonion, that has guided him from youth. It does not tell him what to do, but warns him when he is on the wrong path. It is a whisper of conscience, a boundary between what corrupts the soul and what nourishes it. That inner voice has never urged him to seek safety, wealth, or power, but it has restrained him from dishonorable acts. By obeying it, he has lived in tension with Athens' politics and customs. He admits this openly. He has stood against the tides of the city, asking questions that few wish to answer. This admission is not a defense in the ordinary sense. If anything, it is an indictment of the jury itself, for Socrates insists that his mission has been given by the gods to awaken the city, to sting it like a gadfly, to prevent it from sinking into complacency. He tells them he is not ashamed to have lived this way. He is ashamed only that Athens has been unwilling to face the discomfort of truth. He declares that the greatest harm is not death, but the corruption of the soul. To betray philosophy, to cease questioning, to stop seeking the good, that would be worse than the hemlock that awaits him. And so he utters the words that will echo for centuries: the unexamined life is not worth living. In that sentence, the air seems to change. The jurors shift, some in unease, some in defiance, some in quiet admiration. What is a life if it is lived without reflection, without courage to face one's own ignorance? Socrates suggests that without examination, life is not life at all, but a sleepwalk through appearances, a shadow play of untested beliefs. He tells them he would rather die than abandon that pursuit. Other men would at this moment bring forth wives and children to stir pity. Socrates refuses. He tells the jury that such displays are unworthy of both the man on trial and the city itself. Justice, he says, should not be swayed by tears, by tender pleas, or by the spectacle of families torn apart. It should be guided by truth alone. To drag his sons into the courtroom, to beg for mercy, would be to train Athens in corruption, to show it that emotion rules over reason. And so he stands alone, unclothed of every prop but his words. What he offers is not a plea for himself, but a lesson for the city. The trial, he says, is not about his life, but about Athens' soul. If they silence him, they do not rid themselves of the gadfly, for others will rise. They do not escape questioning, they only reveal their fear of it. To condemn him is to confess that the city prefers comfort to truth, flattery to honesty. The jurors must look into the mirror he holds up and ask what they fear more, the death of one man or the death of their own courage. As he speaks, his voice never rises into anger, nor collapses into desperation. It flows steady and clear, like a river that has long carved its course. He is a man who has faced battlefields, who has known hunger and ridicule, who has lived long enough to see the city rise and falter. What is left to fear? He says to them that a good man cannot be harmed in life or death, for true harm belongs to the soul, and no jury has power over that. The listeners are divided. Some hear arrogance, a man mocking the traditions of the court. Others hear the ring of integrity, a rare voice unmoved by advantage or survival. But whether they love or hate him, none can ignore the weight of his words. Athens, through him, is forced to gaze into its own contradictions, a democracy that fears dissent, a city of wisdom that seeks to silence its questioner. The defense becomes a paradox. In refusing to defend himself, Socrates defends the essence of philosophy itself. He has no apology in the sense of begging forgiveness, but every sentence is an apology in the older sense. A reasoned account, a justification of a life. He lays bare what it means to live faithfully to one's calling, and in so doing, he shifts the trial away from himself and onto the city that judges him. The moment is heavy with irony. Athens prides itself as the teacher of Greece, the home of free speech, the birthplace of inquiry. Yet here, in this crowded chamber, it stands ready to extinguish the very embodiment of that freedom. The jurors are left with a choice not merely about the fate of an old philosopher, but about the identity of Athens itself. Will it prove generous enough to endure its gadfly, or insecure enough to swat it away? Socrates, for his part, seems almost to welcome the test. His serenity is disarming, unsettling. He speaks of death not with dread, but with the curiosity of a man facing a new question. If it is nothingness, then it is peace, a sleep without dreams. If it is a passage, then it is conversation with heroes and poets long gone. Either way, it is not a terror to be fled, but a horizon to be met. And so he tells the jury that they may condemn him, but they cannot harm him. As he draws to a close, he does not ask for mercy, nor does he offer compromise. He has given Athens a mirror, and the reflection is unflattering. He has asked them not to save him, but to save themselves from the decay of unexamined life. And in this act, he stands taller than the city that surrounds him. When he falls silent, the weight of his refusal lingers. The jurors must now decide, but the decision is already haunted. Whatever they choose, they know they have stood before a man who does not fear them, who does not fear death, who fears only the loss of integrity. The city has asked for apology. Instead, it has been given truth. And truth is rarely comfortable. As the jurors prepare to cast their votes, the air thickens with consequence. Soon, Athens will choose not only the fate of Socrates, but the fate of its own conscience. The ballots are cast in silence, each juror pressing his decision into the urn. Pebbles and shards, tokens of judgment, fall like muted echoes of conscience. There is no open debate, no dialogue now. The moment has passed. The city must speak through numbers, through the cold arithmetic of majority. The chamber is heavy with breath. Men shift in their seats, adjusting cloaks, glancing at one another, restless under the weight of choice. For some, the trial has been entertainment, another day in the theatre of politics. For others, it has been a matter of life and death, the future of their city's order. Few are untouched, for to judge Socrates is, in some hidden way, to judge themselves. When the count is finished, the herald announces the result. The verdict guilty. The majority is not overwhelming, but it is decisive. The murmurs ripple through the crowd, a wave of tension breaking against the walls of the courtroom. Some gasp, some nod, some lower their eyes in discomfort. A handful smile in satisfaction, as though an old thorn has at last been plucked from the flesh of Athens. And Socrates, he stands as though he had known the outcome all along. There is no tremor in his body, no shadow of surprise upon his face. He listens as though the words carry no power to wound. Indeed, there is a faint, almost imperceptible smile, as if he greets the decision not with despair, but with recognition, as one who sees the fulfillment of a long unfolding story. For him, the verdict is not the end of questioning, but the final proof of his mission. He has unsettled the city so deeply that it has chosen to silence him. He has lived true to his calling, and Athens has shown its reflection in response. The jurors shift again, uneasy at his composure. The condemned should plead, should fall to his knees, should let fear wash over him. Yet Socrates remains upright, steady, even serene. He has said before that no evil can befall a good man, neither in life nor in death. Now, with the weight of the city's condemnation upon him, he seems to embody that truth. The crowd is divided. Some look upon him with pity, tears brimming as they sense the loss not only of a man, but of a voice that carried honesty like a torch in darkened streets. Others watch with quiet anger, seeing arrogance in his calm, a refusal to bend before the city's will. To them, his serenity is insult, his smile a final provocation. Yet in that chamber, beneath the murmurs and shifting glances, something larger stirs. For Athens itself has been placed on trial, though it does not yet see it clearly. The city that birthed democracy has condemned its most inconvenient questioner. The birthplace of philosophy has silenced the man who gave it its sharpest edge. The irony hangs in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Plato, silent among the onlookers, will later write of this moment with grief. Xenophon, too, will preserve fragments of the memory. But here and now, the only witness that matters is the conscience of Athens. Socrates speaks again, addressing the jury with calm gravity. He tells them that had a few votes shifted, the outcome might have been different. Yet he does not seize on this as cause for bitterness. Instead, he reflects aloud that the narrowness of the decision shows how deeply divided the city is. Half of Athens desires to silence him. Nearly half believes he should be free. His words, like seeds, have taken root in unexpected places. There is a strange dignity in his acceptance. He does not rage against injustice, though he names it plainly. He does not tremble before death, though he knows it is near. He treats the verdict as another turn in the dialogue of his life, another question posed to him by the city he loves. And, true to his calling, he answers not with fear, but with truth. The jurors listen, some moved, some irritated. The trial has not ended with the verdict. The soul of Athens still stands in the balance. For in condemning him, the city has revealed its own fear, its own unease with the very practice it once celebrated. What Athens condemns is not merely a man, but the discomfort of being made to look within. Outside the courtroom, word spreads quickly. The marketplace fills with whispers. Socrates is guilty. Merchants pause mid-trade, soldiers murmur among themselves. Youths who once gathered around him stand silent in disbelief. For decades, he had walked among them, questioning, unsettling, laughing, pointing towards something deeper than appearances. Now the city has spoken against him. The gadfly is to be stilled. Yet truth, unlike a man, cannot be bound by verdicts. The echo of his defense lingers, that the unexamined life is not worth living, that injustice harms the doer more than the sufferer, that death is not to be feared. These ideas, once spoken, cannot be condemned into silence. They move like invisible winds through the city, unsettling even those who rejoice at his downfall. The image of him standing calmly at the moment of judgment will not fade easily. It is an image that confounds expectations, that unsettles those who believe power rests in verdicts and punishments. For here is a man who shows, in the very face of condemnation, that his soul remains free. The day wanes, shadows lengthening across the city's walls. The jurors disperse, some heavy with unease, others brisk with satisfaction. The trial has concluded its first act, but more remains. For Athens, as custom dictates, will not only judge guilt but also deliberate on the penalty. Socrates, though condemned, will soon be asked what punishment he believes he deserves. It is a cruel irony to ask the condemned to name his own sentence, to weigh his life against exile, imprisonment, or death. And in that next exchange, Socrates will again refuse to bend to convention. The city waits, the people whisper. The Hemlock cup lies still unseen, but not far away. For now, in the quiet aftermath of the verdict, one truth lingers above the murmurs. Athens has spoken, but truth remains untouched. The jurors have cast their stones, and Athens has chosen its path. Yet even as guilt is declared, the question deepens. What sentence shall this strange, unyielding man propose for himself? The verdict has been rendered. Socrates is guilty. The air in the chamber has not yet settled, the echoes of judgment still clinging to the walls, when the trial moves into its second, stranger act. Athens has long practiced this ritual. Once guilt is decided, both accuser and accused propose a penalty, and the jury chooses between them. It is not enough to condemn. The city must ask the condemned to speak his own sentence. This tradition bears a peculiar cruelty. For many, it is the last opportunity to plead for life, to beg for exile rather than death, to ask for a fine, to stoop in humility and bargain for mercy. It is a moment when men clutch at survival. But when the eyes of Athens turn upon Socrates, awaiting his suggestion, he does not tremble. He does not shift uneasily, nor weigh his words in hope of pity. Instead, he stands as one who has never measured life by the scale of safety. He begins with irony so daring that the chamber gasps. "What punishment do I deserve?" he asks, pausing with a faint, almost mischievous smile. He reflects aloud on his life. A man who has stirred the city awake, who has sought nothing for himself but the pursuit of truth, who has served as a gadfly upon the great horse of Athens. And so, he concludes, the fitting punishment for such a service is not exile, nor fine, nor death, but honor. He deserves free meals for life in the Prytaneum, the city's hall of champions where victors of games and benefactors of Athens are rewarded. The audacity is breathtaking. To propose honor at the very moment of condemnation is not arrogance but a refusal to bow before fear. It is as if he holds a mirror to the city, asking whether it understands what it has judged. Here stands a man who has never enriched himself, never sought power, never betrayed conscience. For such a life, what penalty is fitting? Surely not death. But if Athens will not see, then let it be shown the absurdity of its choice. The chamber ripples with shock, anger, laughter. Some jurors shake their heads in disbelief. Others scowl, offended by what they hear as mockery, yet some feel a strange stirring. Admiration that, even in the shadow of death, this man remains untamed. He will not crawl before them. He will not buy his life at the cost of his soul. Still, Socrates is not wholly inflexible. At the urging of friends, he entertains the idea of a fine. Plato and others, who have gathered close, offer to contribute. He proposes a modest sum, later raised by his companions to a larger one. Though even this is spoken without much conviction, it is not his way to treat justice as a marketplace where life may be purchased. He knows the deeper choice lies before the jury: will Athens silence him or endure him? When the ballots are cast a second time, the outcome is more decisive than before. Death, the weight of the word falls upon the chamber like a stone into still water. The murmurs swell, some in relief, others in grief. For those who hated his presence, who tired of his questioning, the verdict feels like release. For those who admired him, it is a wound in the soul of the city. And yet, Socrates himself remains unmoved. He speaks to the jurors again, calm, serene, almost gentle. To those who condemned him, he warns that silencing one voice will not silence philosophy. More voices will rise. More questions will come. If they think death can shield them from examination, they are mistaken. For wrong cannot hide forever, it only festers when ignored. To those who voted in his favor, he offers words of comfort. Death, he reminds them, is not an evil. Either it is a dreamless sleep, free from toil and suffering, or it is a passage to another place, where he may converse with those who have gone before. Neither is to be feared. Indeed, he tells them he looks forward to the prospect of speaking with Homer, with Hesiod, with the great heroes of the past. What greater adventure could await the soul than such a journey? The court is dismissed, but the image lingers, a man condemned to die who speaks of death as if it were a blessing. His calm is more unsettling than his questions ever were. For how does one stand before death without trembling? How does one meet the end, not as a curse, but as a horizon? The jurors leave with these questions heavy upon them, though few will admit it aloud. In Athens, the sentence of death by Hemlock is carried out not in haste but in ritual. Socrates will not be dragged to his end that day. Instead, he will return to the prison cell, awaiting the appointed time. By chance, or by fate, the city's laws require a delay. A sacred ship has sailed to Delos, honoring Apollo, and until it returns, no executions may take place. For several days, perhaps weeks, Socrates will live in limbo, condemned, yet alive, walking freely within stone walls, speaking still with those who love him. This interval is a strange gift. The hemlock waits, but not yet. There is time for conversation, for philosophy, for farewells. His friends will come to him in prison, weeping, pleading, plotting escape. He will answer them with the same serenity that carried him through the trial. The city believes it has bound him, but in truth, it has given him one last stage. In those quiet days within those narrow walls, the teachings of Socrates will shine brighter than ever. The sentence of death has been pronounced, but the story is not yet ended. The man condemned still walks, still speaks, still questions. And in that delay, the seed of philosophy is watered, destined to outlive both judge and jury. For now, the hemlock cup rests in shadow, waiting. Its bitterness lies in the future, while the present still glows with the warmth of dialogue, of friendship, of a soul unafraid. Socrates has been sentenced to die, but he has already shown that death has no power over the man who will not betray himself. The Prytaneum will never house him, but another kind of hall awaits. one not built of stone but of memory, one where voices across centuries will gather around his calm example. In Athens, they have chosen death. In history, they have unwittingly chosen immortality. The sentence has been spoken, and the hemlock waits in silence. Yet within the prison walls, before the final cup is raised, there is still time for words, for friendship, for one last season of teaching. The air in the prison is cool, carrying with it the faint scent of damp stone and the faint echo of footsteps that wander corridors long worn by sorrow. Shadows lie heavy upon the walls, yet in the midst of that dimness, there is a presence that steadies the heart. Socrates sits quietly, his figure outlined by the narrow shaft of daylight that filters through a barred window. The cell, bare and unadorned, is no throne room, no lecture hall, yet somehow it becomes both, for where Socrates sits, philosophy gathers, and where philosophy gathers, there is a kind of light. The trial has ended, the sentence has been passed, and yet here he remains, not yet gone, not yet silenced. The city waits, the cup of hemlock waits, but until the appointed hour, there is still time, and time, Socrates shows, is not something to be feared or squandered, but something to be shaped by thought, by dialogue, by the pursuit of wisdom. One by one, his friends come. Their sandals scuff against the stone floor. Their voices tremble as they greet him. Some can barely speak, weighed down by grief, while others come with plans and pleas. They beg him to flee, to accept their help in escaping the city that has condemned him. Gold has been offered, bribes arranged. A ship waits, they whisper, ready to take him into exile. Yet Socrates listens without agitation, his eyes steady, his voice calm. "My friends," he says, "you fear for me as though what lies ahead were a misfortune. Yet what is exile but another kind of death? To flee would be to betray the laws of the city, the very laws that raised me, sheltered me, gave me life. If I trample upon them now, what lesson do I leave you? That fear is stronger than justice. That wisdom can bend when it is tested. The words fall not as rebuke, but as quiet truth. His listeners bow their heads, for in their hearts they know he will not leave. The prison walls, meant to contain him, seem instead to magnify his freedom, for he cannot be moved by fear. It is here, within these walls, that the dialogues continue. Plato listens, young and intent, gathering the words that will one day carry his teacher's voice across centuries. Crito, dear friend and companion, presses once more, "Socrates, think of your children. Think of the grief of your wife. What good will come if you stay? Must philosophy demand your life as well as your thought?" But Socrates shakes his head gently. "If my children are to learn from me, let it not be that their father betrayed what he taught. Let them see that a man can stand firm even when the world trembles. It is not life itself that matters, but the life well lived, and if to live well is no longer possible without betraying what is right, then death is no defeat, but release." The cell becomes a school, not of words alone, but of example. The philosopher teaches not through argument, but through the way he meets fate. The walls that should choke hope instead cradle conversations about the immortality of the soul, the meaning of justice, the mystery of what lies beyond. Even as time shortens, the talk deepens. As though the approach of death sharpens clarity, there is no wailing here, no despair. Instead, there is a strange serenity, as though Socrates has transformed the prison into a temple where the soul is prepared for its journey. He speaks of the soul as a swan, long silent, but singing before it departs, its final song the most beautiful. His listeners hold their breath, for they feel it. This is not a man undone, but a man fulfilled. The torchlight flickers against the walls as evening descends. Outside, Athens moves on with its bustle, markets open, torches lit, voices raised. Inside, in the stillness, a different kind of life unfolds. The prison, intended as an end, becomes a continuation, a place where philosophy breathes one last time before it must fall silent. Some of his friends cannot bear it. They turn away, their faces wet with tears. Others cling to him, unwilling to let go. Yet Socrates remains steady, his voice soothing, reminding them that grief belongs to the living. But to fear death is to mistake shadow for substance. Is death not either a long sleep without dreams, or a passage to another place where the just are gathered? Why fear what may be a blessing? He asks softly. The question hovers in the air like incense, settling into hearts uncertain and trembling. Here, in the prison cell, we glimpse a truth that Athens could not silence, that wisdom cannot be bound by stone, nor virtue undone by decree. The city may condemn, but the philosopher teaches still. And in teaching, he leaves behind something greater than life, an example that no chain can hold. Night deepens. The murmur of voices fades, and the prison grows still. Socrates remains, calm as ever, his thoughts not turned inward in fear, but outward in care. For his friends, for his city, for the soul's journey beyond the horizon of life, his composure radiates like a lamp in the dark, casting a glow that reaches far beyond those narrow walls. For centuries to come, men will remember not just the Hemlock, but this cell, this place where a man awaited death not as a captive, but as a teacher, as a guide, as one who believed that to live rightly is worth more than to live long. The cell becomes a memory, and the memory becomes a mirror. What does it mean to be free? Is it to escape the city, to cheat its laws, to cling to breath? Or is it to stand within walls, yet remain untouchable by fear, unbroken by the weight of fate? Socrates answers not with escape, but with presence. The cell, once a symbol of punishment, becomes instead a monument to the soul's resilience. In that dim light, among tears and questions, there blossoms something enduring, the calm assurance that truth is stronger than death, and that even as the body is bound, the mind can soar. The stone walls of the prison stand silent, but within them something eternal stirs. Soon the cup will be brought, and the calm will be tested once more. Yet for now, in this quiet cell, Socrates prepares not only himself but all who love him for the final lesson yet to come. The prison cell is quiet in the dim hour before dawn. Stone walls breathe the chill of the night, and a faint shaft of pale light filters through the narrow window. In this silence, footsteps approach with a hurried rhythm, breaking the fragile stillness. It is Crito, old friend and faithful companion, his face heavy with worry, his heart burdened with the weight of desperate love. He finds Socrates, as always, sitting upright, unshaken, eyes calm as if watching something beyond the walls. The philosopher has slept easily, even in chains, as though dreams are softer companions than fear. Crito marvels at this serenity, yet he cannot accept it. He cannot let his friend walk willingly into death. Socrates, he whispers urgently, the hour is nearly upon us, but the doors, they are open. The guards can be persuaded, their silence bought. I have arranged it all. We can leave tonight. Exile waits, safety waits. You need not drink the poison. You need not die. The words spill from him like water from a broken vessel. Crito speaks not only of possibility but of duty. Think of your children, he pleads. Think of your followers who will be left fatherless in wisdom. To remain here is to abandon them. It is to abandon life itself. The prison air grows heavy with his desperation, but Socrates listens without haste, his gaze steady, as though hearing not merely his friend's words, but the trembling beneath them. When at last he answers, his voice is calm, carrying the quiet weight of truth. My dear Crito, he says, your love is plain, and I honor it. But must we listen only to the voice of affection, or also to the voice of what is just? Crito protests, shaken by the response. Is it just to let injustice destroy you? Is it not nobler to resist a corrupt verdict than to bow beneath it? His question trembles with anger and sorrow alike. Socrates, however, does not rise to anger. He unfolds his thoughts slowly, like a teacher guiding a child by the hand. Consider, my friend, when we live within a city, do we not live also under its laws? And have we not, by remaining here all these years, by walking freely in the agora, by raising children beneath its protection, have we not agreed, in silence, to honor these laws? To flee now would be to betray that agreement, to strike at the very harmony that holds the city together. He pauses, and the silence itself becomes part of the argument. Crito shifts uneasily. The prison walls seem closer, as though they too listen. Socrates continues. Tell me, if the laws themselves could speak, what would they say to me? Would they not cry out, Socrates, you have lived under us from birth until now. Never did you leave, never did you reject us. Yet in the hour of judgment, when we command, will you turn your back and destroy us? If you break us now, what will remain for your children? What city will welcome you, a breaker of laws? The image hangs in the air, haunting and persuasive. To Crito, it feels as though the very stones of Athens are speaking through his friend's voice. But the verdict is unjust, Crito insists, clinging to the last defense. His hands tremble as he grips Socrates' arm. Must a man not resist when wrong is forced upon him? Must he bow even when innocence is condemned? Socrates rests his hand gently upon Crito's, not to silence him, but to soften the sting of his own reply. Yes, it is better to suffer wrong than to commit it, for wrong committed corrupts the soul, and the soul is our truest possession. Death may harm the body, but injustice harms the soul, and that is far worse. Shall I flee and wound my soul to preserve what is already fleeting? No, my friend. To live dishonorably is a greater death than the cup that awaits me. The Crito lowers his head. His heart is torn between love and understanding. He cannot fault the reasoning, yet the pain of it cuts deep. He longs for his friend's presence in life, not his memory in death. Socrates, sensing his turmoil, speaks more gently still. You speak of my children. Would you have them learn that their father, when faced with judgment, chose escape over truth? Would you have them grow knowing that the man who taught them of virtue betrayed his own teaching? Better they lose me now, and keep my example, than live with me as a hypocrite. The prison seems to glow faintly with his words, as though the chains upon his wrists shine with a strange kind of freedom. For Socrates has turned captivity into choice, and death into integrity. Crito weeps softly, yet he is not without comfort. He sees now that this man before him cannot be moved, not by fear, not by love, not by promise of escape. He is anchored in something deeper than circumstance. anchored in the harmony of his own soul. The night passes slowly, the torches burning low. The two friends sit together in silence, not as prisoner and rescuer, but as companions at the threshold of eternity. For Crito, the silence aches. For Socrates, it is peace. When dawn stirs at last, the light falls pale upon the prison floor. The city outside stirs with its daily noise, unaware of the quiet drama within these walls. Crito clasps his friend's hands one last time, pressing his forehead against them as if to seal a bond. "Forgive me," he whispers, voice breaking. "I only wish to save you." "You have saved me, Crito," Socrates replies, "for you have given me the chance to speak what matters most. Remember it and teach it to others, that justice is the harmony of the soul, and that no chain can bind the man who lives in truth." The words linger like incense, filling the cell with unseen fragrance. Crito departs slowly, his footsteps reluctant, his heart divided. He knows he will soon lose his friend, yet he carries away something death cannot claim, a vision of courage rooted not in defiance, but in fidelity to truth. And Socrates remains, calm as ever, watching the dawn spread across the walls. The hemlock has not yet come, but he has already chosen his path. Not exile, not flight, not compromise, but the steady road of integrity, even unto death. The prison door closes and the silence deepens again. In the hush that follows Crito's departure, the shadows of the cell seem less like prison bars and more like thresholds. Soon, the questions will turn toward death itself, not as an enemy, but as a final teacher. The morning grows brighter within the stone chamber, though the walls seem untouched by the sun. A gentle hush lingers in the air, broken only by the faint sounds of the city stirring beyond the prison. Within, the circle of friends has gathered. Their faces are worn with sorrow, their hearts heavy with the weight of time that is slipping too quickly away. Yet Socrates sits among them as though he were not the one awaiting death, but rather the one guiding them through life's most difficult lesson. His composure is not forced, it radiates naturally, like the steady flame of a lamp that has long since accepted the night around it. The disciples lean in, reluctant to waste even a breath of this final day. Their questions come not as debates, but as pleas. Pleas for comfort, for understanding, for some foothold against the rising tide of grief. And Socrates, seeing their need, turns to the subject that weighs heaviest upon them all: death. He speaks not with dread, but with clarity. "We must consider," he begins, "what death truly is. For if we fear it blindly, we give power to shadows. But if we look at it with reason, perhaps it will reveal itself to be no enemy at all." The friends shift, their eyes fixed upon him. Even in this cell, he is still the teacher of Athens, still the gadfly, still the companion who unsettles yet consoles. Socrates pauses, then offers the first image. Perhaps death is nothing more than sleep. A sleep without dreams, a rest so complete that no stirring troubles it. If this is so, then what greater blessing could there be? For who among us has not wished for such a night of peace? A single slumber, unbroken and eternal, free from pain, free from worry. The thought drifts through the room like a bomb. Some of the disciples close their eyes, imagining such silence, such release. To them, it feels less like an end than a gentle dissolving into rest. But Socrates is not finished. He leans forward slightly, and his voice carries a brighter note. Or perhaps, he continues, "Death is a journey. a crossing from this place to another realm, where the souls of the departed dwell. What greater adventure could there be than to meet those who have gone before? Imagine speaking with Orpheus, with Homer, with Odysseus. Imagine asking them what you have always longed to know. In such a place, we could question not only the wise of Athens, but the heroes and poets of all time. His eyes glimmer, not with fantasy, but with the excitement of a man considering the next stage of inquiry. If this is true, my friends, then death is not an end, but a continuation. The philosopher does not cease with death, for there will still be questions, still be conversations, still the pursuit of truth. The disciples exchange glances, their grief softening into wonder. For in his words, death begins to lose its darkness. It becomes either the softest of sleeps or the richest of journeys. Neither to be dreaded, both to be accepted. Cebes, still troubled, speaks hesitantly. But, Socrates, can we truly believe the soul endures beyond the body? Is it not bound to this flesh, this vessel that withers and fails? Socrates smiles, gently as a father to a questioning child. The body is but a garment, Cebes, worn for a time and then set aside. The soul, I believe, is the weaver who outleaves the cloth. Have you not noticed how wisdom and virtue seem to belong more to the soul than to the body? The flesh grows weaker with age, yet the soul may grow stronger in understanding. Why should that which is strongest die with what is weakest? He raises his hand, as though weighing the matter in his palm. If the soul were merely born with the body, how could it carry memories of truths it has never been taught? How could a child, when questioned, reveal knowledge he has not yet learned? I tell you, the soul carries with it echoes of eternity. It does not begin here, and it will not end here. His words weave through the chamber, soft as incense smoke, touching each heart. The disciples breathe more easily, as if the walls themselves have widened, granting them room to hope. Still, some remain uneasy. Simmias frowns, whispering, "And yet we fear." Even knowing these things, the unknown still presses upon us. Socrates nods, never dismissing their human frailty. Yes, fear is natural, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to live by reason even when fear is near. And reason tells us this: death is either nothingness or it is passage. If nothingness, it is peaceful. If passage, it is wondrous. In neither case is it to be feared. The simplicity of this balance steadies them. The room feels lighter, as though the hemlock itself has grown less heavy in its inevitability. Outside, voices of the marketplace rise faintly, distant echoes of life continuing beyond the prison walls. Inside, time seems suspended, as though the day has paused to listen. Socrates continues speaking, not to console himself, but to prepare his companions for the truth they must soon face without him. "My friends," he says softly, "you have walked with me in the search for wisdom. Do not let this moment undo you. Remember that philosophy has always been a preparation for death. For what is philosophy but the practice of loosening the soul from the body, of turning the gaze from the fleeting to the eternal? Today is not the end of that practice. It is its fulfillment." The disciples weep quietly, yet their sorrow is now mingled with awe. They sense that they are witnessing not a collapse, but a passage, not despair but completion. Socrates, ever tender, offers a final image. "Think of the swan," he says, "who sings most beautifully before it dies. It does not mourn, but rejoices, for it is departing to join the gods it has always served. In the same way I too must sing, not in grief, but in gratitude for what lies ahead. His voice trails into silence, and for a moment the cell is filled with profound stillness. It is not the stillness of fear, but of reverence. The disciples sit with him long into the day, carrying his words like fragile lanterns in their hearts, for in the presence of death, Socrates has given them not despair, but a dream. The dream of immortality, not as possession, but as possibility, as vision, as hope. And so the philosopher waits not with trembling, but with expectation, as if he is on the verge of awakening into a new dawn beyond sight. The dream has been spoken, the vision painted, sleep eternal or journey everlasting. Now, as the shadows lengthen, philosophy itself will gather one final time around him, in dialogues that echo like a farewell hymn. The final morning unfolds with a strange stillness, as though the city itself hesitates to move forward. Athens awakens to its ordinary rhythm. The clang of smiths, the calls of merchants, the distant cries of children. But within the stone walls of the prison, time gathers itself differently. Here, the hours are not measured in work or profit, but in the last conversations of a man who has always believed that dialogue was the highest form of living. Socrates sits surrounded by his companions, his disciples, his friends. They press close, as though their nearness might delay the inevitable. Faces are wet with tears, voices tremble when they speak, yet the philosopher himself radiates calm. He does not scold their grief, nor does he indulge it. Instead, he leads them into the familiar terrain of questioning, for what else is there to do but to think, to reason, to search for truth. Even as death approaches, Plato is absent, too ill to bear witness, yet others have come, Phaedo, Crito, Simmias, Cebes, Apollodorus, and more. Each man carries a weight of sorrow, but each is drawn also by a quiet hunger, the desire to hear, once more, the voice that has shaped their lives. The conversation begins almost gently. They speak of the soul, of its nature, of its destiny. Socrates, as always, does not hand them answers as gifts but unfolds them as discoveries. He asks, he challenges, he guides. Even in chains, he is still the gadfly, still the midwife of thought. Let us consider, he says softly, whether the soul is truly bound to the body or whether it belongs to another realm entirely. For if philosophy is the turning of the soul away from the senses, away from the distractions of flesh, then perhaps philosophy has always been a preparation for death. The philosopher, my friends, has been rehearsing this moment all his life. The words are both comfort and wound. The disciples nod, but their hearts ache at the thought. Philosophy, a preparation for death. It seems too cruel a rehearsal, too perfect a stage now reaching its final act. Simmias speaks, his voice unsure. But Socrates, how can we be certain? How can we know the soul outlives the body? The old man leans forward, his eyes alight. Do you not see, Simmias, how opposites give rise to one another? Wakefulness from sleep, life from death. If the living are born of the dead, then death cannot be the end. It must be a passage, a turning of the cycle. And if learning itself is recollection, then the soul must have lived before it entered this body. Why then should it not live again after it departs? His reasoning is steady, but his tone is tender. He speaks not to conquer doubt, but to gently loosen its hold. The friends listen, each word sinking like water into parched ground. Cebes frowns, troubled by another thought. But Socrates, the soul may endure for a time, like smoke after fire, and yet still perish in the end? Might it not be worn away, destroyed by the winds of eternity? Socrates smiles at the challenge. Sabes, you speak well. But consider this, what is it that the soul seeks? Is it not truth? Is it not the eternal, the unchanging? The body craves food and drink, but the soul longs for what does not decay. Why would it hunger for the eternal if it were not itself of that same nature? What kinship could there be between the mortal and the immortal, unless the soul too partook of the eternal? The room stirs with thought. Some weep quietly, some fall silent in awe. Apollodorus, who has never hidden his emotions, breaks down openly, sobbing at the sight of his master speaking so calmly of leaving them. Socrates turns to him gently. Do not weep, Apollodorus. Would you not rather rejoice that I go where wisdom may be clearer? Think of me not as lost, but as set free. The words console, yet they sharpen the pain. For freedom means separation, and separation means the silence of his voice among them. As the hours move, the discussion deepens into the heart of philosophy. Socrates speaks of the forms, of beauty itself, not merely the beautiful things, of justice itself, not merely acts deemed just. These are eternal, unchanging, perfect, untouched by time. The soul, in seeking them, shows itself to be of their company. The body distracts, deceives, drags down, but the soul aspires upward, ever upward. The soul that has lived in philosophy. He says, "Ease like a swan ready to depart, singing its final song not in sorrow, but in joy, for it knows it will soon dwell with what it has always loved." To fear death, then, is to misunderstand life itself. The disciples listen as though drinking from a final spring. Every sentence feels like a farewell gift, a fragment of immortality pressed into their hands. They know these words will outlive the man who speaks them, carried in memory, preserved in writing, echoed in hearts yet unborn. At times, silence falls heavy in the chamber, the weight of mortality pressing close. But Socrates, as if sensing the gloom, lifts it again with another question, another image, another gentle reasoning. He is determined not to let their last hours together drown in grief. Philosophy, he insists, must remain their companion until the very end. As midday approaches, the talk turns to the nature of virtue, the harmony of the soul, the way of living rightly even when the world condemns. Each point is laid not as doctrine but as path, a way for his followers to continue walking long after his steps have ceased. Phaedo, who will later give his name to this dialogue, watches closely. He notes every gesture, every phrase, storing them like treasures for the day when memory must carry what presence can no longer provide. In his mind, the conversation is already becoming more than an exchange. It is a monument, a living text of philosophy in its purest form. As the shadows lengthen, tears flow more freely, yet Socrates does not falter. His voice, though calm, carries a quiet radiance, as though it already belongs partly to another world. He consoles his friends, not with promises of certainty, but with images of hope, reasoned visions of eternity, and the unwavering conviction that truth is worth more than fear. The dialogues linger like music, rising and falling, now gentle, now piercing. They are not merely arguments. They are farewells wrapped in philosophy, embraces made of words. Each friend leaves the chamber not only in sorrow but in awe, carrying away the memory of a man whose last day was not spent in lament but in teaching. The prison grows quieter as the day wanes. The disciples sit with him in silence, no longer asking, no longer debating, only holding close the presence of their master. Socrates gazes at them with affection, as though imprinting their faces upon his soul. He has given them all he could. Not wealth, not safety, but the example of a life lived in truth and a death embraced in harmony. The last dialogue fades into stillness like the last note of a lyre hanging in the air. Around them, the world continues. The city bustling, the sun setting. But in this cell, time has become sacred. As the final words dissolve into silence, the hour draws near when words must give way to action. Soon, the jailer will arrive with the cup in his hand, and philosophy itself will face its final test. The air in the prison is still. The morning has stretched long, like a final thread of life winding itself toward its end. The friends of Socrates gather close, their hearts heavy, their eyes red with the strain of waiting. For hours they have listened to him speak of truth and soul, of immortality and the eternal, and though his words are steady, their bodies betray them, shoulders bent, hands trembling, tears threatening to fall. The atmosphere carries a weight, but it is not chaos, it is the gravity of farewell, and then the door opens. The jailer steps in, his face a portrait of sorrow. He is not a man accustomed to grief, his duties are practical, carried out with quiet resignation. But today he cannot hide his anguish. In his hands he holds a small clay cup filled with a dark liquid. An infusion of hemlock, the state's chosen agent of death. His voice shakes as he speaks, barely lifting his eyes towards Socrates. He apologizes. He says what he has never said before to a prisoner. You are the noblest, the gentlest, the most just man I have ever known. And I must give you this. Tears slip from the jailer's eyes as he hands the cup forward. He turns quickly, unable to watch, for his heart betrays the law he serves. The sound of his sandals fades into the silence. The room contracts around the cup. It is small, ordinary, no different from a vessel used for water or wine. And yet, in this moment, it holds the weight of life itself. For the disciples, it is unbearable to see. They cover their faces, they sob aloud, their reason drowned by grief. The man who has taught them to think, who has guided them like a lighthouse through the storms of youth, now sits with his death in his hands. But Socrates, he is calm. He looks at the cup not as an enemy, but as a final companion. His hand does not shake. His eyes are steady, clear, like one who has already stepped beyond the fear of mortality. With a slight smile, almost playful, he reminds his companions, we must not waste time. The poison works quickly. The disciples beg him to delay, to wait until the sun lowers further, to stretch the hours as far as possible. But Socrates shakes his head. Delay is another form of fear, and fear has no place in the soul that seeks harmony with truth. To postpone would be to cling, and clinging, he has always said, blinds one to wisdom. So, without hesitation, he lifts the cup. His fingers curl around it like a ritual chalice. He does not rush, nor does he falter. He drinks deeply, slowly, as though he were sharing a libation to the gods. Every swallow is deliberate, almost reverent. It is not poison he tastes, but release. The passage from one realm to another, the doorway he has long prepared to enter. When the last drop is gone, he places the cup aside with quiet dignity. His lips curve into a faint smile, as though he has completed a duty both simple and profound. For him, there is no tragedy. There is only the fulfillment of a life lived in accordance with its principles, carried to the very last breath. The silence that follows is unbearable to his friends. Their cries fill the chamber. They throw themselves onto the floor. They cover their heads. They weep with abandon. But Socrates remains their anchor. His voice, calm and unwavering, cuts through their grief. Control yourselves, my friends. Is this why I sent the women away? That I might die surrounded by lamentation. Be at peace. Be strong. He rises as the poison begins to move through him. The jailer had instructed him he must walk to allow the hemlock to spread more quickly through his body. So he does. He paces slowly, his steps deliberate, as though each movement were a final lesson. His friends watch him, torn between despair and awe. The poison creeps upward, numbing his feet, his legs. He feels the cold ascending, yet he does not resist. He only reports it calmly, like a philosopher describing a process for study. When his legs grow heavy, he lies down on the bed, as instructed. A servant covers him with a cloth. His body relaxes, but his face is composed, almost radiant. He speaks one last time, his voice gentle but firm. Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Do not forget. Pay the debt. The words strike the room with mystery. A cock, the bird of sacrifice, was offered in thanks to Asclepius, the god of healing. Why, at the edge of death, does Socrates remind them of this? Scholars through the centuries have wondered. Perhaps he means that death itself is a kind of healing, a release of the soul from the prison of the body, a cure for the illness of mortality. Perhaps he means that his life, even in its end, must remain faithful to the duties of gratitude and piety. Whatever the meaning, the words fall into the silence like a final seed planted in the hearts of his companions. Crito bends close. He promises he will remember. Socrates breathes slowly. The poison climbs higher, pressing against his chest. His breaths grow shallow, then still. His eyes remain serene, open but distant, as though fixed upon a horizon unseen by the others in the room. And then, at last, his body is quiet. A hush fills the chamber, not the hush of emptiness but of reverence. Death has entered, but not as a tyrant. It has come gently, like a teacher leading the soul into another lesson. His companions bow their heads. Tears return, but softer now, as if even grief has been subdued by the majesty of what they have witnessed. Socrates has died as he lived, faithful to reason, unafraid of truth, and devoted to the harmony of the soul. The man who drank hemlock as though it were wine has turned death into a ritual of peace. And in the centuries that follow, men and women will remember this moment, not as the end of a man, but as the beginning of a legacy that no poison can extinguish. For ideas cannot be killed, they are only carried forward, whispering from the lips of one generation to the next. The chamber grows silent, but in that silence, his words linger like embers that refuse to die. From this stillness rises not only grief, but the birth of memory, memory that will one day ignite the story of philosophy itself. The city of Athens breathes uneasily under the dim light of early evening. The streets, once resonant with laughter and debate, now feel hollow, as if the air itself mourns the absence of the philosopher who stirred its heart and mind. Torches flicker in the agora, casting shadows along the marble, shadows that seem longer, more reflective, as if the city itself has grown older in a single day. Socrates' disciples move quietly through these familiar paths, their sandals brushing against the dust, their thoughts heavy with the memory of a man who will no longer walk beside them. Each step carries the weight of grief. Phaedo, Crito, and the others speak in whispers, voices softened by sorrow and reverence. They remember his laughter, sharp yet gentle, cutting through the clamour of everyday pretense. They remember the questions that unsettled them, the challenges that honned their minds, and the calm that settled their spirits in moments of doubt. Athens has taken his life, but the memory of his integrity, of his unwavering devotion to truth, cannot be removed. The streets of the city feel different now. Statues, once indifferent, seem to lean in toward the footsteps of these disciples, bearing silent witness. Markets bustle with routine chatter, yet the rhythm feels hollow, as if the life of inquiry has been pulled from its centre. The philosophers, the orators, even the young students who had once been drawn to Socrates' circle carry the invisible imprint of absence. He was the gadfly, the irritant, the voice that dared to speak in the face of comfort, and now that voice has fallen silent. Yet, within sorrow, there is a strange joy. The disciples sense it, almost like the quiet hum of a candle that has just been lit in a dark room. Socrates' departure was not an end but a continuation, a message rendered in flesh and blood, then preserved in the minds and hearts of those who loved him. The life he led, the questions he posed, and the courage with which he faced death have become more luminous in absence. What the city sought to silence has now achieved immortality. In the hush of the evening, they carry not just grief, but the quiet warmth of a soul that transcends flesh. As they walk past the Stoa, memories float with the dust motes in the fading light. Socrates' barefoot steps, the echo of his laughter, the cadence of his relentless questioning. They linger here, interwoven with the architecture, embedded in the stone and the air. He has passed from the world, yet in each whisper of wind, in each quiet courtyard, his presence persists. It is as if the city itself has absorbed a fragment of his spirit, carrying it forward, trembling yet resolute. The disciples speak of him softly, recounting his words, his gestures, the peculiar way he would tilt his head in thought, as if peering into the invisible threads that connect all human souls. In their recollections, Socrates' life becomes a meditation. Each story, each recollection, is a candle lit against the encroaching darkness of forgetfulness. They feel both grief and gratitude, mourning a friend while honoring a legacy that cannot be extinguished. Meanwhile, the city stirs in uneasy consciousness. Citizens who had cheered or condemned, who had attended or avoided the trial, now feel an emptiness that words cannot fill. The walls of Athens, so proud and steadfast, seem momentarily frail, aware that they have silenced a voice more enduring than their own. Some wander aimlessly, as if seeking a phantom in the shadows, hoping for one more glimpse of the philosopher who questioned all certainties. The wind carries whispers of Socrates' life, reaching ears attuned to thought, leaving a residue of reflection that will not easily fade. The agora, where once he had walked, sparking dialogue among merchants, soldiers, and poets, now holds an echo of absence. Debates rise and fall, but they lack the spark that only his presence could ignite. Young men who had hung upon his every question feel the sudden weight of responsibility without him. They must carry the torch of inquiry themselves. Athens, restless and wounded, begins to sense the subtle fracture in its moral and intellectual fabric. The city has punished the individual, yet, in doing so, it has exposed a deeper vulnerability within its own conscience. The disciples reach the edge of the city, where the hills begin to rise, and the evening air carries the scent of olives and stone warmed by the day. They pause, as if the landscape itself demands reflection. Here, away from the clamour, sorrow softens into contemplation. Phaedo turns, seeing not just Athens, but the invisible threads that bind all those who search for truth. Every street, every pillar, every echoing chamber seems touched by Socrates' absence and presence simultaneously. He has left a wound in the city, yet he has sown a seed that will grow silently, persistently, across generations. In their silence, the disciples realize that they are witnesses not just to a death, but to a metamorphosis. Athens has killed a man, but the essence of his life, his devotion to inquiry, his courage in the face of injustice, his reverence for the soul, cannot be confined to mortal walls. These qualities ripple outward, touching minds uncounted and hearts unseen, planting the beginnings of philosophy that will flourish in years to come. The tears they shed are both sorrow and recognition. The city has been taught a lesson in loss, and yet the spirit it sought to silence has already transcended it. Even in absence, Socrates' influence is tangible. The disciples speak of him not as someone departed, but as a companion in thought, a presence that inhabits the spaces of reflection. His questions linger in the air, gentle yet insistent, challenging assumptions, inviting examination. Every conversation, every debate, every quiet moment of moral consideration now carries the weight of his legacy. Athens may have silenced the body, but the soul's dialogue persists, echoing in minds and hearts far beyond the reach of punishment or time. As the evening deepens and stars begin to puncture the dark velvet of the sky, the disciples continue their slow journey home. Each step is a meditation, each breath a remembrance. They understand now that sorrow and joy are not opposites, but companions in the experience of witnessing truth. Socrates' final lesson is clear: integrity endures beyond life. Courage shapes memory, and the pursuit of wisdom can never be taken by force. The city sleeps uneasily, its streets quiet yet vibrating with unseen reverberations. Somewhere, a dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, a lamp guttering in the wind casts a fleeting shadow. Athens carries the memory of its own conscience now, a wound that is also a seed. What has been lost in life has been gained in awareness, and what has been silenced in flesh has been immortalized in thought. Socrates' disciples, walking with both sorrow and wonder, sense the invisible hand of time guiding the lessons forward, shaping the city's conscience long after the philosopher himself is gone. And as they disappear into the night, the streets of Athens hold both grief and promise, a quiet reminder that even in loss, the spirit of inquiry endures, ready to rise in the hearts of those who will continue the questions he left behind. In the quiet hours after Socrates' passing, the city of Athens continues its restless rhythm. As if trying to forget what it has seen, markets hum faintly with the exchange of goods. Children chase one another along sun-warmed stones. The wind drifts across the rooftops, stirring dust and olive leaves. Yet beneath this ordinary pulse, an invisible current of thought stirs. The death of the philosopher, though a wound in the flesh of the city, becomes the birthplace of something enduring. Among those who grieve, none is quieter, none more attentive than Plato. He walks the streets with eyes lowered, his mind replaying every question, every conversation, every argument that had once flowed like sunlight through his master's presence. He sees the agora not as it is now, but as it had been, alive with the cadence of inquiry, alive with Socrates' relentless insistence that every man examine himself. The city seems both smaller and larger to him at once. Smaller in that the voice of truth is gone. Larger in the realization that this loss carries a weight beyond mere flesh. Plato retreats into reflection, into the sanctuary of memory. He reconstructs Socrates' words as carefully as one might arrange fragile fragments of glass. Each dialogue, each lesson, is a thread woven into the tapestry of the mind to be preserved against time. There is sorrow in this labor, a grief that is almost tactile, pressing upon his chest with the heaviness of unspoken questions. Yet within that grief, a faint glimmer of possibility arises. If Socrates' voice cannot speak freely, it can still live in thought. The days pass, and Plato begins to write. At first, the words feel inadequate, clumsy, mere shadows of the vibrant life he recalls. But slowly, carefully, he discovers that the act of writing is itself a form of resurrection. Through the dialogues, Socrates' questions endure. Through the academy, his spirit will breathe once more. The young men who gather around Plato's teachings will encounter, indirectly, the presence of their teacher, learning the art of inquiry, the courage to face injustice, and the reverence for the soul that Socrates exemplified. The academy rises quietly in a grove shaded by plane trees and cypresses, a space carved from the ordinary world into one of contemplation. Here, the air is thick with thought, yet light with laughter and curiosity. Students sit cross-legged upon the earth, debating not for acclaim but for understanding. Every lesson carries the faint echo of Socrates' voice, probing, unyielding, gentle, in the rhythm of questioning. The master leaves again, not as a man, but as the spirit of philosophy itself. Through this labor, Plato begins to understand a truth that had been only glimpsed before. Philosophy is not a practice bound to one lifetime. It is a seed planted in the soil of human minds, watered by reflection, and carried forward by those willing to ask again and again, never satisfied with comfortable answers. Each dialogue written, each question posed in the academy becomes a monument not of stone, but of thought, a structure that can never crumble, because it exists in the living world of consciousness. The city of Athens, for its part, continues, unaware of this subtle transformation at first. Citizens move about in the patterns of everyday life, unaware that the soil beneath their feet now contains the roots of something extraordinary. Some remember the trial, some the outrage of the execution, but all are touched, however dimly, by the moral weight left behind. The gadfly has stung, and though the wound it leaves is sharp, it also provokes reflection. In time, the memory of Socrates will grow, not as resentment or fear, but as a quiet, persistent calling to thoughtfulness and integrity. Plato's recollections of Socrates are intricate mosaics. He remembers the cadence of argument, the subtle humor that undercut pride, the unwavering calm in the face of insult and death. Each memory carries more than just the past. It carries potential, a guiding light for the present and future. The academy becomes the vessel for this potential, a place where men and women can learn the discipline of inquiry, the humility of recognition, and the courage to live with conscience intact. Outside the academy, the world continues its discordant rhythm. Wars, politics, ambitions, and desires swirl, each competing for attention. Yet within the grove, time seems suspended. Here, the philosopher's questions do not die. They accumulate layer upon layer, creating a living edifice of thought. Students sit in circles, discussing virtue, justice, beauty, and the soul, never tiring of the endless pursuit. Each question is a spark, and each spark ignites another, a chain reaction stretching across the years, linking mind to mind, generation to generation. Plato writes dialogue after dialogue, seeking to capture not the man's voice alone, but the method, the rhythm of thought itself. Socrates becomes at once character and catalyst, a figure through whom the eternal questions of existence can be explored. The dialogues, written in ink and preserved on papyrus, will travel far beyond Athens, carried across seas and centuries. They are at once instruction and meditation, demanding not only understanding but reflection, not only learning but living. In these moments of writing and teaching, Plato realizes that philosophy is never static. It is movement, a flowing river of thought, nourished by curiosity, reflection, and courage. Socrates' legacy is not merely in the words he spoke or the life he led, but in the questions he left behind. Questions that will ripple outward, challenging each person to examine themselves, to seek truth beyond convenience, and to recognize the soul as the measure of a life well lived. The academy, modest in appearance, becomes a lighthouse in the intellectual darkness of the world. Travelers arrive seeking not riches or titles, but wisdom, guidance, and the challenge to think more deeply. In their presence, Socrates leaves, not in flesh, but in the collective mind of those willing to question everything. The seed planted in grief now grows toward the light of understanding, spreading roots into lands far beyond the olive groves of Athens. And so, the quiet grief of one student transforms into a monument for all time. Plato's pen, guided by love, reverence, and memory, channels the essence of a man who refused to compromise the soul. The dialogues become not just texts, but companions to those who seek reflection, partners in the silent conversation with truth. Through them, Socrates' questions continue to challenge, illuminate, and awaken. The wind drifts softly through the academy, carrying the scent of olive and earth, mingling with the low murmur of discussion. Students pause, gazing into the horizon, sensing that thought itself has taken root and will endure. Plato watches quietly, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the exhilaration of a task fulfilled. In the distance, the city hums, unaware of the profound work taking place in the quiet grove, where grief has become cultivation and absence has become guidance. Socrates' life, his death, and the memory carried by Plato create a cycle: inquiry, reflection, remembrance, and rebirth. Philosophy, once the voice of one man wandering barefoot through the streets, now breathes in the hearts of many. Every question asked in earnest carries the echo of his life. Every moment of contemplation is a tribute to his integrity, and every pursuit of truth is a continuation of his spirit. Through the academy, the dialogues, the questions, and the lived example, Socrates endures. He is no longer just a man of Athens. He is a presence in every place where thought meets courage, where reflection challenges complacency, and where the soul is valued above all else. The seed he planted has taken root, and though Athens may never fully recognize it in its time, the world will inherit its fruit. And as the grove settles into evening, with shadows deepening between the trees, the seed of philosophy whispers its first promise. That one life, lived in pursuit of truth, can grow far beyond itself, shaping countless minds and leaving an eternal question in its wake. The early morning in Athens is hushed, almost reverent, as if the city itself holds its breath. Dawn drifts through the narrow streets, brushing the marble columns with soft, golden light, illuminating dust and cobwebs alike. The sounds of merchants and children are distant, subdued by a solemnity that has seeped into the air since the execution of Socrates, a silence more profound than absence lingers in the shadows, carrying the weight of contemplation. For in this silence, the city begins to reckon not with what was taken, but with what remains, or the enduring principles of a man who could not betray his own soul. Socrates' final hours were a testament to a life lived in steadfast devotion to truth. In the quiet of the prison, as the hemlock did its patient work, he had spoken not of fear, nor of self-preservation, but of the eternal obligations of the soul. Death, he insisted, was not to be feared. The soul, nurtured by inquiry, guided by justice, and aligned with virtue, passes beyond the body without trepidation. To live dishonorably, to compromise the integrity of thought or action, is far worse than any suffering inflicted by others. These were not abstract ideas for Socrates. They were the marrow of life, the compass by which he navigated a world that often twisted justice into appearance. Those who witnessed his passing recall the calmness of his demeanor. There was no flinch, no cry, no surrender to panic. He lay as a man who had completed his task, who had walked every street of inquiry, questioned every claim of authority, and examined his own life until it was stripped bare of falsehood. And when the body finally faltered, when the last breath passed through lungs now emptied of vitality, what remained was not emptiness, but illumination. The philosopher had shown, in living and dying, that the soul's fidelity to truth is worth more than life itself. Plato, standing among the disciples in that dim cell, understood the gravity of what had occurred. He saw the embodiment of a principle that would transcend time, that moral courage is the truest form of strength, and that wisdom cannot be measured by survival alone. This lesson, witnessed firsthand, became the seed of everything Plato would later nurture in his writings, in the academy, and through the dialogues. Socrates' beliefs were no longer private. They had become a testament, a beacon for anyone willing to confront the challenges of conscience and intellect. The heart of Socrates' philosophy, distilled in those last hours, rests upon the supremacy of the examined life. To betray oneself, to abandon reason or conscience for the fleeting comfort of conformity, is the gravest harm a person can do to the soul. Socrates lived this principle relentlessly. He challenged the complacent, questioned the powerful, and endured accusations, trial, and death with the serene conviction that the soul's integrity is sacred. Every act, every word, every moment of courage reinforced a single, luminous truth: to preserve truth is to honor the self, even in the face of the unknown. In the days following his death, Athens struggled to comprehend what it had done. The city had silenced a voice that asked uncomfortable questions, a voice that dared to pierce illusions and confront hypocrisy. Yet, paradoxically, in taking his life, the city could not extinguish the principle he embodied. Citizens would speak of him in hushed tones, some with regret, some with envy, others with admiration. His death became a mirror for Athens, reflecting both the limitations and the possibilities of a society attempting to live justly while punishing courage. Even in absence, Socrates' presence was felt. Every scholar, every student, every seeker of wisdom who pondered the nature of justice or virtue now carried a fragment of him within their minds. The dialogues Plato would write, the questions he would pose, and the academy he would establish ensured that the teachings would not be confined to memory but extended into the living pulse of thought. Socrates' death, rather than an end, was a quiet amplification resonating across time and space. To suffer injustice, he had demonstrated, is less damaging than to commit it. In enduring the trial and accepting his sentence without resistance or evasion, Socrates exemplified this principle. The city could impose death, but it could not compel compromise of the soul. In this, he taught the ultimate lesson of moral courage. External harm is temporary, internal corruption is permanent. The body, fragile and fleeting, may be taken, but the soul, properly attended, remains sovereign. As the sun arcs over Athens, the lesson extends beyond the prison walls. Philosophers in distant corners of the city and across generations would come to recognize the quiet power of a life aligned with conscience. Socrates' insistence on questioning, examining, and never succumbing to expedience is a guide not merely for thought but for action. He reminds those who follow that life's value is not measured by the ease of survival, but by fidelity to principle. To live rightly, to act with integrity, is to participate in a form of immortality. The image of Socrates walking barefoot through the streets, debating, questioning, and observing remains vivid in memory. He is more than a man, he is an ideal, a moving embodiment of inquiry and courage. The streets of Athens, once ordinary, now carry his footsteps as if imprinted into the very stone. Every passerby who pauses to reflect, every student who wrestles with a difficult question continues the journey he began. Death may have taken the body, but the resonance of thought, the living question, persists. In contemplating these final beliefs, one realizes that Socrates' life and death are inseparable. His unwavering commitment to truth defines both his existence and his departure. The act of dying becomes itself an extension of life lived rightly. The calm with which he faced the hemlock is not resignation, but affirmation of the soul's primacy, affirmation of conscience over fear, affirmation of reason over expedience. In this, the philosopher leaves a model for generations to come, a standard against which all moral courage may be measured. Plato would later reflect on these moments in writing, capturing not only the words but the essence, the rhythm, and the intention behind them. Each dialogue, each account of the final hours, is a meditation on what it means to live and die rightly. Through these records, Socrates continues to question, to challenge, and to inspire. His voice, preserved in thought, transcends the limits of mortality, offering guidance to those willing to engage with the deepest questions of life. The wisdom distilled from his final convictions is simple yet profound. Truth, integrity, and courage define the soul more than any worldly gain, more than safety, more than life itself. To remain faithful to these principles is to honor existence. To betray them is to forfeit the very essence of being. In understanding this, the disciples, and all who encounter Socrates' legacy, begin to see life not merely as a series of actions, but as a canvas upon which the character of the soul is painted. In the quiet aftermath of his passing, a stillness blankets Athens. The city carries a wound it cannot yet name, a subtle disquiet that arises when conscience has been confronted by courage, and yet, within this unrest, there is also a seed, a potential for reflection, for understanding, for moral and intellectual growth. Those who learn to see, to question, and to act with integrity will carry this seed forward, and in doing so, continue Socrates' work in ways the city could not have foreseen. Death, as Socrates demonstrated, is not annihilation but transformation. It is the ultimate boundary, one that measures not fear or avoidance but courage and understanding. To face it with calm, to meet it as one meets a long journey rather than an end, is to affirm the power of the soul and the primacy of conscience. In this affirmation lies the ultimate teaching. Life is an exercise in fidelity to truth, and death, approached rightly, is its completion, not its termination. The echoes of Socrates' beliefs ripple outward. Students in the academy, readers of dialogues centuries later, philosophers in distant lands, all feel the persistent pull of his insistence. Examine, reflect, question, and honor the soul. His life and death are inseparable guides, models of moral courage that remind every thoughtful person that existence is meaningful only when aligned with principle. The legacy of a single man thus becomes a lantern in the dark, a steady flame illuminating the path toward wisdom and integrity. And so Athens, the city that condemned him, unknowingly participates in his enduring lesson. Through grief, reflection, and remembrance, the principle of Socratic inquiry expands beyond its mortal confines. Truth remains unassailable, the soul untarnished, and the courage to face injustice continues to inspire. Death, once feared, is revealed as a moment of clarity, a natural conclusion to a life lived in fidelity to conscience. And as the city hums quietly beneath the morning light, the lesson lingers in every thoughtful heart, that life, measured not in years but in fidelity to truth, and death, embraced with calm and courage, together shape the enduring story of the soul. And so we leave Socrates not in silence, but in the soft echo of a life fully lived. Though centuries have passed, his questions still hum in the quiet corners of thought, a gentle reminder that the pursuit of truth outlasts the walls of any city, the whispers of any crowd. He drank the hemlock, yet what he truly embraced was serenity, a calm that no fear could touch, a stillness that no injustice could diminish. And in that quiet courage, we are invited to reflect on the delicate strength of the human soul. Thank you, dear listener, for sharing this peaceful space with me tonight. Your presence here is felt, a quiet candle beside mine, illuminating the corridors of history with gentle warmth. Together, we have walked the streets of Athens, paused in its shadows, lingered in its light, and witnessed a wisdom that transcends time. You are not merely hearing this story, you are part of its continuation, carrying forward its echo into the hush of your own mind. Now, as your body softens and the day slips away, allow your thoughts to drift like leaves upon a slow river. Let the weight of the world fall gently from your shoulders. May your dreams carry you softly through the night, across the silent streets of memory where curiosity and courage mingle like starlight. Let the questions of Socrates and of all who came before settle in your heart like a quiet, nourishing ember. This has been the sleeping hourglass, where the past tucks you in, where stories linger like a gentle hand resting on your shoulder. If this brought you even a whisper of calm, you are always welcome to return to wander again through the soft corridors of time. And now, with the candle of this night burning quietly in the stillness, may your rest be deep, your heart light, and your dreams threaded with the tender wisdom of ages.